Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I wanted to talk about the subject of voting, primarily voting in the U.S. Now, what I will say most likely applies to many or even most other countries too, but I am not going to make any assumptions about that. I am not a political scientist. I'm not a political sociologist. There is actually a field called political sociology. Yes, it is different than political science. We make different assumptions, and we use different methodologies in political sociology. Well, I shouldn't say we because I'm really not one of them. But yeah, there is a field called political sociology, and it is a very interesting field. I know something about it, but not that much. I know about it a bit because I've worked with a political sociologist. But I'm talking about voting in the US because that's what I'm familiar with. Well, sort of familiar with. Well, mm, half familiar with, a quarter familiar with, 10% familiar with, 1% familiar with, maybe not that much familiar with. Why? Because I have never voted. That's right. I have never voted. I mean, there's nothing stopping me from voting. I can't imagine what that would be. I mean, I can register to vote. I don't even know when. I was gonna say tomorrow, but I don't know when the date for voting is. That's how little I know about the process. But I certainly could register to vote, and I could vote in the upcoming presidential election, but I won't. And I think that there is a good reason not to do it. It may not accomplish anything, and to be honest, I think that is true. I think that me not voting is not really going to accomplish anything, but as a moral principle, which is really all it is, I cannot see myself voting. Now, people have asked me, why not vote for a communist candidate? There are a couple of reasons that I can give for that. Every communist candidate that I'm aware of is a first worlder, or a first worldist, I should say. Um, his or her primary focus is on the first world. I could be wrong, but I have looked into it a bit, and I'm not aware of any US presidential candidate, or in fact, any candidate for presidential office anywhere I have lived who was communist, who was not a first worldist. And I would not vote for a first worldist because I think it's a waste of time. I don't think that communism can begin in the first world. Second reason is because I feel that by voting for a communist candidate would be a waste of time because no communist presidential candidate in the US, to my knowledge, has ever gotten ballot access. Does that mean that no presidential candidate who was a communist could be successfully voted into office? No, but it would be a real long shot because the only way that the person could get voted in would be by a write-in vote. And how many people in the United States are going to write in a vote for a communist? I mean, I'm a realist on many levels, and realistically, that is simply not going to happen. No communist presidential candidate is going to be elected, is going to be given ballot access, is going to win through write-in votes. So that destroys the communist idea. Second, the lesser of two evils argument. I could spend hours debunking that, but I won't. I will spend less time than hours, but I will attempt to debunk it. First, the lesser of two evils is still evil. And as a moral realist, I would never vote for a person that I consider to be evil. In my lifetime, with relatively few exceptions, and those exceptions were mostly based on the fact that little or nothing was known about that person's presidential policies once he got into office. But then, once he got into office, it became clear why I didn't vote for him. Now, I know that history does not repeat itself. I know there is a possibility that somebody could be elected into office that would do a bang-up job, whatever a bang-up job is. But I have no faith in the system. I don't believe in doing that. Why in the world, as a Maoist-Third worldist, would I vote for a first worldist presidential candidate? And believe it or not, I have considered it. I have considered it on several occasions where I despised the person who was in office at that time. And I would have been happy to see almost anyone replace him. But then, when I considered the character, and in most cases, the political past of that person, I just couldn't bring myself to vote for him. It was literally a result of my moral compass. I am not going to vote for somebody who violates my moral compass, especially somebody who was not even a communist. I knew a lot of Bernie bros, mostly online, and mostly to some extent, I guess, among my students as well. Now, I do not want to specifically criticize Bernie Sanders. I'm sure he's one hell of a guy, but he is not a communist. He has never been a communist. He has never pretended to be a communist. Now, at one time, Bernie Sanders was a democratic socialist. But a democratic socialist is not a communist. Plus, clearly, although occasionally, maybe more than occasionally, Bernie Sanders will unjustifiably call himself a democratic socialist. He's not. He has also called himself, and I heard him say that, a social democrat. That is what he is. What does he admire? He admires the Nordic model. He has said so. The Nordic model exists in places like the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Switzerland, but it's simply a type of social democracy. It's not even democratic socialism. And that is what Bernie Sanders admires. So if Bernie Sanders were elected president, I assume that he would try to get the Nordic model or something like it or something close to it passed into law. However, presidents cannot make laws. That is the job of Congress. Presidents can propose laws. They can propose them all they want. It makes no difference. Laws are made by Congress. Then they are signed into law by the president. If Congress does not like a particular law, it can veto it. So presidents really have very limited power, especially over US domestic policy. Where they have more power is over US foreign policy. That they have some power over. But I can't think, without naming names, of a single American president whose foreign policies I liked. So I am in a bind. I admit it. I am in a bind. I live in the United States. And on one level, I do feel that I have a kind of, I wouldn't say moral duty, but just duty as a citizen. I guess you would call that a civic duty to vote for president. But I just don't know who to vote for. And I'm not going to vote for someone just for the sake of voting. I don't think anyone should do that. I really don't. I think we should have standards. I think we should vote for a person if we support them. Now, in some countries of the world, it is a law that you have to vote for the president. That law does not exist in the United States, and I am happy about that. Obviously, if it existed, I would vote for someone. I'm not a lawbreaker. I'm not going to violate federal law and refuse to vote. That would be kind of silly, kind of a waste of time, a silly stand to die on. So no, if the law said you need to vote, Mark, yeah, I'd vote. But I'm happy I don't have to. Because to me, what is the purpose of voting for someone if you know in advance that that person, not being a communist, is not going to implement policies that you like? I am also not aware of anybody, and maybe I'm wrong, who has run for president of the United States, whether communist or not, who has been a third worldist, who has placed their hopes on the third world. In the case of a third world Maoist, who has placed their hopes for establishing socialism and communism on the third world. There hasn't been such a person, at least to my knowledge, and I think my knowledge is correct. Maybe I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, tell me, and I will seriously consider what you have to say, as long, and this is the qualification, as long as that person is also a commie. Because I will not vote for somebody who is not a commie and a third worldist. Both of them. Again, I am not going to pick the lesser of two evils. That is simply not something that I should do as a Maoist third worldist or as a critical realist. As a Maoist third worldist, I think it would be counterproductive for my objectives. As a critical realist, I think it would violate the idea of moral realism, meaning I believe that morality is real. There is such a thing as good and bad. Good is emancipation, among other things. But I would say primarily, when I think of good, I think of emancipation from capitalism, or more broadly, the capitalist world system, and all the things that come along with, like racism and sexism and ageism and ableism and so forth. So I can't think of an excuse, and I've tried, I really have tried, but I can't think of an excuse to vote for someone as president of the United States who is not literally a Maoist third worldist. Now, maybe I shouldn't be that judgmental. As I discussed in a recent podcast, there are types of third worldism which are not Maoist. There are types of communist third worldism which are not Maoist. Maybe if somebody like that were running, I might feel inspired to vote for that person. Maybe. I'm not going to put it totally out of question. That would be silly. I try to look at each election cycle on its own terms. I never exclude the possibility that I may at some point vote. To me, that would be foolish. I feel like I should always be willing to vote for someone if that someone is a person that I genuinely could support. But to vote for someone I don't support, that to me would be genuinely immoral. Genuinely immoral. I was having a conversation with someone recently. She is a supporter of Joe Biden. I will not say my feelings about Joe Biden, again, because I've already said them many times in the past, and there's no point in going over old territory. But she likes Joe Biden. And I told her that I have never in my life voted for a president. Never. In fact, I have never voted for anybody, even a garbage collector. I will admit that maybe I am taking it too far on that. Maybe I should vote for garbage collectors. Maybe. I don't know. But I guess I am disillusioned with the process, alienated from the political process, and not in some deep down depressed form. No, not at all. I just don't want to do something that is a waste of time. And if somebody gets elected and turns out to be a complete and total jerk, especially to the third world, I do not want to feel that I am responsible for it in any way, shape, or form. And believe me, I would feel that way. I would. I know myself. I know my values. I know how I think. I know how I feel. And if somebody was elected and I voted for them and they turned out not to be what I wanted, basically a communist and a third worldist. I'm not saying necessarily a Maoist-Third worldist, but at least a communist and a third worldist. And I've never seen such a person run. No, I wouldn't vote for that person. Plus, what's the point? What's the point? A person like that would not get elected anyway. Now, we had a chance in the US a little over 100 years ago to move in a communist direction. We did have a chance. There were a number of communist candidates which had some degree of popularity in the US, but they didn't win. In fact, FDR's New Deal, which people praise all the time, was actually an attempt by Roosevelt to prevent communism from rising in the US, which he saw as a danger. So he proposed the New Deal as a compromise, a social democratic compromise, so that people would support it rather than supporting a communist. And it worked. People not only supported the New Deal then, but many people, including the social democrat Bernie Sanders, supports it to this day, which is another indication of why he is not a communist. I cannot imagine a communist supporting FDR's New Deal. It was literally a rejection of structural change, a rejection of revolution, and ultimately a rejection of communism. So to me, I just don't see an out. I don't see an alternative. I'm not going to say there isn't one. Maybe there is. Maybe there is some way that I could vote and not feel like a louse afterwards. But if there is, I have not discovered it. And I would need to be comfortable, really comfortable, that I would not feel like a louse or even potentially feel like a louse, whatever that means, after that person was already in office. I simply would not do it. I simply would not do it. For the time being, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.